Hello. So this is actually not a live webinar because I'm trying some new technology, and so there'll be no questions in this webinar. If you if you do see this link and you get sent this link, then you can write questions underneath. And as always, the PDFs that we're going to go through are all available for you on the website. So this webinar is about behavioural questions, and we're going to go through what behavioural questions mean and why they even ask behavioural questions. So the behavioural questions, let's look at some classic examples. Okay, could you describe a time you had a difficult problem to resolve and what you did? Could you describe a time you had to deal with a difficult person? Could you describe a period of time that you found particularly difficult? So this is where you're talking about time management, how you handle stress, how flexible you are. Could you describe your greatest success? And could you describe a time you made a serious mistake? And there are other ones, but these are the main 5, and we're going to go through them, in fact, in much more detail. So the classic way to respond to a behavioural question is STAR, which is situation. So a basic introduction to the background, the way you tell the story, really not much detail. They don't need to know even names of people or why this situation existed. Please don't do that, because we'll talk a little bit about this, but the idea is someone begins a story and they're paying attention, and then you're telling them information, so they're filling up, they're organizing this information, and if it's not relevant, by the time you move on the story, they're wondering, why do I know this? Is that relevant? Is that going to come back? So really, when you set up the story with the situation, try to be brief. The next element is task. And task is a brief description of what you had to do, what you had to fix or solve or so basically why it's happened to the situation, what's changed that's going to require you to act. And act is the third one, action. And these are the things you actually did to complete the task. Okay, or may possibly fail. If that's given the story, that's okay. And then finally, the result. And the result should also be very brief. Now, the action is where you really want to be focusing. Okay, and an important question is, what is the point of behavioural questions? Why are they even asking these questions about your past? And the simple reason is, the idea is that by hearing your true story from your past that they can ask questions about, they're going to say, well, we can now predict what you would do in the future. So when you're preparing your interview and you're thinking about, well, what is the manager worried about? They will probably ask you a specific question about how you would manage how did you manage in the past a specific situation. So for example, if you're a teacher, they might say to you, how would you handle a disruptive student? Or in customer service, how would you handle a very angry customer? These are all the same ideas, and what they're trying to do is, well, what's going to be your story, and then use a true story. Okay. So let's actually begin with an example. Before we go on with more theory about this, let's actually have a look at a real example. Could you describe a time you had a difficult problem to resolve and what you did? This is a very common type of question. How did you resolve a problem? So, could you describe a difficult problem? So again, this is a different PDF. Okay, question 11. And there are variations to this. Like, have you ever solved an interesting problem? How do you approach difficult problems? What is one of the most difficult problems you solved in your recent work? Have you ever solved a problem with another person? What was the biggest problem you solved in that job? Maybe they're talking about a specific job. And how do you view problems in your job? So it's the same variation, okay? And so let's think about how we're going to do this. So what is your objective in this question? It's to communicate that you are able to solve a problem in a logical and deliberate way. Okay? Not that you have solved problems, because remember, their objective is what will you do in the future. So, and here is an example answer. Let's go through this. So, as a situation, yes, I remember a particular problem. At the time, I was a junior marketing executive and I was working on an in-store promotional campaign. I was given the responsibility to source and brief the designer and shortlist the designs for my manager to choose from. So this is the situation. Not much information. I don't need to know the client, the budget, anything really. What shops, it doesn't really matter in the story. Next we have the task. So here's like maybe the problem. Okay, and we're going to talk about why I mentioned tension here in the core template. So here's the story. Everything was going fine. The final designs had been approved and sent to print, but I soon noticed that there was a problem with all the displays. They looked far too big, and when I checked the original specifications, I realized that an error had been made copying the details into our system when the order was taken. And now we had to deliver to the client in 3 days. But that's the designs, were far too big for them to use in the shops. Right. What are you going to do? How do you manage that problem? Okay. So here we got the action. This is about 60%. Here's an example of some steps you could do. We're going to talk about this element in much more detail. So the first thing I did was to get as much information as possible from the client in terms of when would their last delivery be, since there was a problem our end, I said. And so I got an extra 4 days of time. Then I contacted the design team and asked for their opinion about the impact on the change of size and how long and at what cost any redesign might take. And they gave me some options, as did the printer. So I spoke to them as well, who saw us as a favourite customer and offered to prioritise the reprint. I then emailed my marketing manager with a summary of all that had happened that morning and to ask for a quick meeting to brief him more on what I'd been doing and to offer him the solutions, options, timelines and costs that I'd found. Okay, so this is the action. These are the steps I did. This is very interesting. Notice how I'm really focusing almost the verbs in this step. What did I do? What was my logic and my deliberate path? Okay. And then a result, very short again. He was obviously very angry, manager this is, but he was also very grateful for how I fixed the problem. And the client never really knew what had happened or how close to disaster the campaign was. Okay, great. So let's have a look at this core template. You've got this situation, you've got the task and tension. I'll come back to that. And you've got the action, about 60% of your story, and then you've got the result. Think about the situation here, okay, in this resolving a problem. The objective here in your statement is to give the minimal information required so my actions later to solve the problem can be understood. That's the focus. Just giving context to the story. Okay, so let's hack this answer here for the behavior. It's always the same. Okay, your focus in the story is about your actions. So delete information that is about company products, company structure, pre-story background, external issues, or irrelevant side notes. Please keep that really simple. Okay? Don't confuse them. Don't distract the listener. Say the minimal amount of background story. Okay. So example ideas in this section. So it will be things like the people involved, the products involved, the relevant processes, start time of the story, maybe the company, the organizations involved, the size of the situation, in whatever grant money, whatever thing, the importance of the situation, your role at the time, your responsibilities at the time. But even then, only mention what's relevant. And here we got some example phrases about how to structure that, like in the thing. In the story. Then we go into the task element. Okay, this is to show the urgency and the need to solve this problem. In that story, it was the client, you got 3 days. How are you going to do it? So you're imitating a real stressful moment and you're showing them how you respond under stress. So here as well, in your story, think about an external factor. Think about things like deadlines and a meeting that's coming, an exam, completing an important document, some sort of pressure that's on you as well. Not just something to do, but there's a bit of pressure. And the impact as well in the story, or the business values. Great. So the next thing is you've got some example ideas. So think about limited time to solve the situation. Think about if the problem was not resolved, or some external issues that might happen if this wasn't resolved as well. And here's some more phrases in the PDF for you. And then we've got the action element. I can plan to resolve a problem in a logical and detailed yet flexible way. That's your objective. Okay. Remember the idea. You're telling them about how you could. They want to know how you would not do it now in that story. Could you do it again? So your story is communicating this logic. It's communicating these steps that you took. And we're going to look at that. What type of steps to include. Hack the answer again. Avoid the magic black box. We'll talk about that, what that is. And include all your small steps. And we're going to talk about that. Talk about the analysis you did, the ideas you rejected, the people you spoke to, the steps that failed possibly, the information that you spread, the interactions with management. Okay? These are the small steps that led to the big steps, because this is what you're trying to communicate, that you would be able to reproduce this success given a new problem. Okay. Some example ideas. Think about the information you collected here, the analysis, the people you informed about the situation, pre-solution, for example. There you've got the steps that you took, the people you contacted once your actions began, and you've got some example phrases here for actions. Great. In the PDF. And then we've got finally the result. What's the objective here? To quickly close the story in a satisfying way, not necessarily an impressive way. It doesn't matter. Maybe in this story, what happened next was a disaster. In a way, it doesn't matter because that doesn't affect what you did. Okay. And so to think about the result, state the impact of your actions, state your key learning as well. So especially if you made a mistake, think about what did you learn from this. Okay. And some ideas here, the improved results, the new situation, impact on others. The words of a client, the words of team members. Like in that story, there was the word of the manager, saying how grateful they were. Okay, great. And some example phrases. Okay, great. So let's go back. That's an example of a story. And now, why do I add tension to the classic STAR, which includes the word task? So it's normally situation, task, action, result. And I include the word tension because I think if possible, you should add this tension. You should add this pressure, that you're working under pressure. You're not just thinking, oh, I had a couple of weeks to solve this problem, so I spoke to this, already relaxed. Okay? Tension can the easiest way to add tension is by giving urgency to what is to be done. Basically a deadline. Something that's out of your control. You've got to do something by a time. And I think that's a great way to add this tension in the story. And it makes it a better story. The people listening were like, oh, what did you do? You had 3 days. Oh, what did you do? How did you print things in 3 days? How did you get redesigned? Oh, no. And you got to tell your manager what's going to happen. So it's great. Tension. What are the basics to include? So these are the key things to think about to include in your story, okay? Especially the action. So when you're telling what you do, think about getting information to act upon. Okay, so in that case, it was the design information, these things. Then think about your communication with others at every single stage, if possible. Maybe you're asking favors, information requests, you're asking for advice, you're informing people of what's happening, you're explaining people what's happening. An organization is a network of people. So if a manager hears you saying how you are creating network and you are communicating without them necessarily, that's great. That's exactly what the manager needs. He needs everyone to work together, and that means conversations. Okay? Also, think about in the story about how you plan the solution in advance. Okay? Think about maybe, well, I did this and this. You could state that. Okay? And finally, make sure you act logically in the sense that it makes sense why you did these steps. And if needed, communicate your logic. So say, why did you do that step? So I did that in order to do this. Great. Let's have another quick question then. Describe a time you had to deal with a difficult person. Okay. So let's get rid of that and then difficult person. So basically, this can come in various forms. Like, have you ever had a problem with an important stakeholder, or how would you approach a situation where you had to deal with a difficult fellow employee? Have you ever had a member of staff who refused to do their job properly? Has someone ever accused you of being difficult to work with? Have you ever changed someone else's mind and got them to follow your plan? Who was the most difficult client you ever had to deal with, and how did you approach the situation? So it's about people. So think about as well in this job, what type of people do I have to interact with? So what would make a good story? And your objective with people is that you are able to communicate with people in a cooperative but practical way. So give you an example. Imagine you're a manager. Well, if you had a very disobedient or very disruptive staff member, your story might finish being practical in the sense of them losing their job, you firing them. That's just what would happen in your job. That's part of your job. So being practical in that sense. So you're not trying to, the objective is not to make a client happy, or the objective is not to fire people necessarily. You have to be practical in what you do, which can be giving bad news to people. So the example answer here, let's have a look. So the situation, yes, of course, I've dealt with difficult people. In customer services, I've had more than my fair share of difficult people, especially customers. One story in particular was so here's the situation. I was working at Acme Bank, and I had only been there a few weeks and was responsible for processing business loan extensions. And then I come into the task, okay? So I was still learning a lot about the work, and I hadn't had all my compliance training yet. And there was a particular customer who I was asking for documents from, and they were being very, very slow. And in fact, their case was approaching the deadline. But instead of giving me the documents, they started saying they would report me, that they were a trusted big client of the bank, and they would keep saying that what I was asking for wasn't necessary. And no one had ever asked me that before. And I was risking my job by losing their business. A lot of tension here. I'm like, what are you going to do? Okay. We kind of know what you should do. You should tell the manager. But the person is saying, I'm new here. So am I at fault? So let's have a look at how to tell now what you do, the reaction. So what are you going to show in this interview? So I'll be honest, I started panicking. The first thing I needed to do was to clear my head. So it's a step. I didn't feel I would be making a good decision if I stayed stressed. So I took a few minutes break. I went for a walk, and when I got back, I went to the procedures manual and tried to find out what to do, but it wasn't very clear. I then spoke very quickly to a team member who had heard some of this case, but they made it worse. They reminded me how big the client was. Well, I didn't want to go straight to my supervisor, so instead I emailed the compliance training officer with a very brief, generic description. And she replied within an hour with the procedures to follow, which involved telling my supervisor. So I collected my case notes, made sure they were really easily understandable, and wrote a simple bullet point list in case my supervisor couldn't actually talk to me in that moment. And brought her the paperwork. She listened to me in that actually straight away, and thanked me and took on the case personally. Okay. As it turned out, the customer was trying to take advantage of me, and in fact, within a few months, their business failed. They were obviously in trouble financially. So this person in this story didn't deal directly with this person, okay? So, but given their role, they had another role, which was like going to make sure that they were not tricked by that person in their particular role. A different role would require a different practical response. So here we've got the template and the objective here. Give them all information. Then think about your actions. Delete this extra information. And got some examples here with people. So think about the people, the products. Size, again, very, very similar information. Some phrases here. The statement to show the urgency and need to deal with this difficult person, okay? And add an external factor, possibly in the tension. In this case, their threats, okay, are an external factor. So we've got some more ideas here, some more phrases, and the objective here in the actions. I can deal with a difficult person in a friendly, flexible, but practical way. And I think that suits that particular person in customer service, okay, in that story. And going down, okay, more examples and some more phrases, and the final to quickly close the story. Okay, so if we look again at the story, let's move on. Mistakes to avoid. So when you're telling your stories, what things should you not do, okay? And basically the key is to aim for clarity at every step of the story. Avoid too many details, especially in the situation, especially at the beginning. Avoid irrelevant details as well. So don't give extra information that could be kind of interesting, maybe, you know. A thing to remember here is sometimes, because you're talking about the same industry with the people interviewing you, like for example in that customer service story, they might say to you, oh, well, what did the procedures manual say, actually? Or what did the manager... They might ask for extra information. Let them do that. That's okay. Let them go where they might be interested, because they might wonder the connection to their own company. But don't you include those kind of like extra information. Another thing, avoid magic solutions. Basically, some people in their answer set up the story, set up the task, and then I fix the problem. It's like, oh, that was it. I did something magic. A black box. We'll talk about that next. Like, there was a problem here. You know what I did? I made some phone calls and I fixed it. The problem with that is that they don't know if you can repeat that. It's just magic. Or was it luck? You know? And avoid as well results-focused stories. These are stories where you really only want to tell them the result, not how you got the result. And that's different, you see. And if you've got great results that you've done, use it in other stories. They might ask you how you did them. Fine. What's important here in the behavioural questions are the actions. Great. So avoid the black box. Avoid simply saying, oh, I worked extra hours and I found the solution. Okay? That doesn't tell them what you did, and they don't know if how you got the answer as well. So this answer doesn't tell me if you could do it again, or even how did you do it? Was it just luck? So too often people do a lot of valuable work automatically. And this is a little problem when you're telling your story and thinking about what to do. And they do so many great things automatically because you're professional. You've done maybe that job for a year. You don't think about what you do. Yet those actions are actually precisely what you should be including. Okay? So a good example is, oh, well, then I contacted IT and I got a report. Okay? Well, you should include that because that's a step in the story. You contacting other people, you getting information. Okay, so include that. So break down all the steps into smaller steps. Include all all of them, and show your logic. Show your logic. As your old maths teacher used to say at school, show what you were doing. Okay, great. So let's have a look quickly at a period of time that you found particularly difficult. Okay, so this is about stress now. So could you tell me a period of time? This is similar to how do you deal with suddenly being under a lot of stress? Have you had to manage a lot of projects simultaneously? How do you approach your time and activity management? Have you ever been extremely stressed at work? How would you react to suddenly having a lot of deadlines from a lot of people at the same time? And can you think of a time when you would not finish your responsibilities on time? So your objective here in talking about time is to communicate that you are able to manage your time in the context of working with others. So this is key. When you talk about time, it's not your time, often. Other people want your time, and you have to help other people meet their deadlines. And things happen every day. You walk into the office and something crazy could happen immediately. How can you react to that? How flexible are you? So here's an example answer. So this happened about 3 years ago when I was responsible for all the client invoicing and the company was approaching the end of the financial year. However, as part of the accounting management team, I would also be required as necessary to help when things got very busy with our clients' creative campaigns as a support for other team members. Okay, so that's the situation. Let's go on to the task. And just as the final financial records had to be done, my busiest time of the year, our biggest client asked the company to produce a whole new campaign within 2 weeks. Bit of tension here. And I was told I had to be available as much as possible. I really wanted to help as much as I could, but I was already very busy and did not want the quality of my key responsibilities to be affected. So this person has got some time management issues now, okay? Not their own fault, not that they managed a mistake. And also in the time stories, it's very immediate. It's something happening very quickly, okay? And your reaction. Often people answer with stories about how they plan 6 months in ahead. That's not really interesting. We can all do that, I think John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're making plans. We have to be available to move and be flexible. Okay, and a manager wants flexibility. Doesn't want to approach you, say you need to help, and you say, "Oh, I'm busy. I've got too much to do, boss." That's not a good idea. Okay, so we got some action in. My first step was to speak to the accounts department and find out what documents they would absolutely need in the next 2 weeks and what documents could be delayed. So getting information, speaking to people. I then calculated how much time those documents would take me to do and how much time I could probably give outside of office hours for the next 2 weeks. It's a bit of a planning there, calculating time, managing resources. Then I informed my team leader about a realistic amount of time that I would need to have in order to do my end of client invoicing. So I'm speaking to my manager. I'm saying, look, I need about 2 hours a day minimum here, okay? And I asked for extra temporary permissions so that I wouldn't need to bother the other staff who were busy on the campaign while I was doing my normal work. So there's another clever solution here, how to manage time, how to help other people with their time. Organising my time and activities like this meant I was able to help the campaigns a lot and cover all my responsibilities, okay, which is more going towards a result as well. And then specifically result. For me personally, it was a great opportunity to be involved in the campaign and to get a lot of creative work I would never have had the chance to do otherwise. I think the key was getting information, informing others, and being flexible yet organised. So there we have that. In the PDF, we go through the thing, and there's more details about the type of things you're looking for, but it's the same idea. Okay? Tell the story. Okay? Put yourself in a good light. Focus as well on what they were interested in and what they want to hear and the logic that you applied. Okay? Great. So let's have a look now at let's continue here. So an element in behavioural questions is something called a situational question. Okay, these are actually hypothetical questions, but they're very, very similar. Things like, what would you do if a colleague was stealing? What would you do if you had to work for a weekend? What would you do if you were about to miss a deadline? And you can definitely then use your behavioural stories, okay? So if you answer directly, you can keep it theoretical. So I would do X, then Y because of that. And then either I would do A or B, whichever was fastest, most secure, whatever that is, okay? And you can use this structure actually in another situation, which is, what if I have no story to tell when I'm doing my behavioural questions, okay? So could you tell me about time you missed a deadline, okay? And you could say, well, that's never happened to me. But if it did, I would. And then you give a situational answer. I would do this, and then I would do that because of that. And then either I would do this or that, whichever was relevant. Okay, so you understand. So you can use that hypothetical language for some behavioural questions, okay? And here's an optional idea. In the action phase of your story, you could, if you want, introduce your actions with situational logic. So, for example, okay, so I think whenever I have to deal with difficult staff, I then go through 4 phases. I speak to them, I get a second opinion, we agree to a resolution, and then lastly, meet again to make a decision. So in this particular case, and now I'm going to give my action answer. I'm going to go through and say what I actually did. But I have given a structure using this kind of situational logic, hypothetical logic, before I do the action, if you want. Okay, it's just an idea. So describe your greatest success. Let's have a little look here. I'll give the variations and then the stories. So what is one of your greatest achievements? How would you go about planning a successful project? What is one of your proudest successes? How did you achieve your greatest success? What makes a project successful? What was going to fail but you made it into a success? Okay, so lots of different variations, but also be prepared with your stories to use them. And what's your objective with success? Your objective here is to communicate that you are able to plan and deliver success with a repeatable general approach. In other words, you can plan to succeed. You are able to do that. Okay? And so even if in those previous questions you took a failure to success, you have the same plan and logic behind that story. So here's an example answer. Let's just quickly go through this. So, okay, can you describe your greatest success? Okay, well, I think one of my greatest successes was when I took a class of teenagers from hating mathematics to passing their school exams. I ran an after-school class for students wanting extra tuition, and one year, a group of parents contacted me to help half their children's class at school. They had a lot of problems with teachers at the school. Okay, that's the situation. And the task. So I met the parents and the children. The children appreciated how important the exam was, but they were very negative and lacked a lot of confidence. Plus, the key problem was that they had only 6 months to prepare before the public exams. Bit of tension, bit of like, oh, what are you going to do? 6 months to prepare mathematics. How are you going to do that? They hate it. So now we go on to the action. Well, the steps that I did. Okay, so I knew that I needed a plan, and that was so little time. I had to almost personalize it for each student. The first thing I did was assess who knew which parts of the syllabus and to what degree. Then I had to speak to the parents about what their realistic grade expectations were given the circumstances. And with this information and the point scoring system of the exam, I was able to create an achievable syllabus given the time and the initial level. Another key element was communicating the aim of the project to the teenagers too, so they would feel success was possible. I made a detailed plan of action that everyone had access to. What's kind of interesting in this story is I don't talk about teaching. In this particular interview, the person's a teacher, but they're not saying, oh, I made them do this type of mathematics. Not really interested in that detail. What the person's focused on here is what they would do to repeat the success. And I'm very proud to say that all but one of the 11 children passed the exam. Okay, so that is again the same core template. So let's go back to the main webinar. Okay, and so let's think now about the ideal story content. Okay, first one, include the ability to do research and planning of possible solutions. Okay, so include this in your story. Talk about resources, timelines, budgets, quality of solutions, okay, and relevant risks of the solutions. Okay. Ideal story content 2. Include the idea that you see the value of spreading information in an organization. You know, ideas like keeping others informed, supplying timely information at the right time to people, being able to give information on request, that you also open to give information. Ideal story content part 3. Include the idea that a team is stronger than the separate individuals. Okay? If this is possible, this is ideal. Managers want teams to unite without them. This is key. Imagine the manager ideally doesn't want to be involved in that. They've got their own things to deal with there. They're worried about, the pressure they're under. The ideal would be that the team does it themselves because they're able to. So imagine someone in an interview really highlighting in their stories how they are doing things, okay? And teams, I guess, could include stakeholders. So in other words, in the story about the design and the printer, in the story, the person is contacting, is making a connection, is solving a problem, and only informs the manager what they did. What they didn't do, which is what kind of to avoid in your story, is I went to the manager to get permission to speak to the designer to do that. That means that every step of the way, the manager is involved. They're not really interested in that. Or they'd rather that you did it without them. So your story should ideally leave the team stronger than it was before. Okay? That's ideally what you would do. Ideal story content part 4. Include the idea that a team is stronger than the separate individuals. Oh, I've just done that. Okay, sorry. I don't know what is there. Ideal story content 5. Make the manager happy. Wow, how to do that? When the time comes to speak to your manager in your story, probably most stories will involve some sort of reporting. Think about these things. Ask them in advance for a meeting. Say that you're going to contact them. Ask for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes of their time. Don't say, I'd like an hour meeting about this. Just say, do you have 10 minutes later? Such respect. They love it. They love it. Also, when you have a meeting, arrive with all the information simplified. Okay? Arrive there. You're briefing them. Okay? And arrive with these kind of solutions planned out. Say, well, there's this option which will cost this, take that long, and there's that problem maybe. This, take this long. Okay. Treat them as kings of choice. What does this mean? So, the idea is this. Knock on the door. There, the manager is sitting on their throne. They are the king or queen. Come in. Come in. And you say, option A, option B. And they go, B. Go. Next. That's what they would love. So if you present that is how you do your situation, that's how you speak to them, you respect their time, you are flexible, about meeting them, you give information that's simplified, you give solutions that they have all the questions they need. So everything, that decision they make can be done in that moment. That's ideal in terms of your dealing with your manager. So let's have a last one then, very quickly. Let's have a last thing. Could you describe a time you made a serious mistake? So, this is a variation of this. Could be, have you ever made a mistake that impacted others? How did you react when you made one of your biggest mistakes? What do you do when you make a mistake? Can you tell me about a time when things went very badly? What's one of the worst decisions you have ever made? Have you ever turned a mistake into a victory? Okay, golly. What is your objective with the mistake type story? Here, the key objective is that when a mistake is made, you are able to minimize any damage and stop it from happening again. Okay? That's your ideal story to communicate. Okay? And let's have a look at an example answer. So, can you describe a time you made a serious mistake? Unfortunately, yes, I have a story about a mistake I made, which I'm not very proud of at all. Well, when I first arrived at Acme Film Production, I found myself given the task of finding a caterer for one of the locations for the film. That's all. I don't need to know the film or anything really, you know. But I get the situation. The task is a bit long here. Let's see. It may be because the information is needed for you to understand what's going to happen next. Okay. I had followed all the requests that I was given about dietary requirements and how some of the more important members of the crew preferred their food. And I'd ordered from a local catering company and met budget. But 2 days before the filming in that location was to start, I discovered my error, which was that in my inexperience of how a film set works, I had forgotten to include the temporary set staff for the location and had only calculated the permanent staff. And what is more, I spent almost all the budget for the catering. I now had 2 days to organise food for 25 people for 4 days with no budget. Okay, what does this person do? So again, actions here. Include more actions as possible. Okay, so develop your own stories. So the first thing I did was contact the catering company and see if there's any way that some of the budget and the menu could be organised to feed more people, which was slightly successful, but they also gave me a quote for the missing people. I worked out a couple of solutions to cut corners in other parts of the budget and even made some phone calls for catering that would happen later in the filming, in order to save money from that part of the budget. I bought all the budgets, quotes and menus all together, and then I asked to speak to my manager and immediately admitted to my mistake and outlined to her the possible solutions I'd come up with and some other ideas I had to solve the problem. She was really good about it and gave me more ideas and told me to keep going with my plans. Okay? In the end, it all worked out, and I think the biggest takeaway for me was to always create and use checklists whenever possible, because working on a set means long hours and lots of multitasking, which I love. Okay, that's a quick introduction to the STAR, to the situation, task, action, result. Okay, going right back to the front. So think about all the points we've made. Start thinking about your stories. Keep it simple. Focus on this action. Don't use magic to solve it. Be super logical about the approach you would do. Focusing a lot on getting information, communicating with lots of people. Anyone who's involved, communicate with those people. Okay? And, helping your manager with information and making choices. They're under pressure as well. Okay? This is a non-live webinar, so any questions you have, if you've been watching this, no problem, put them under the video. Okay, great. See you soon. See a live webinar, actually. Okay, bye now.